Can you hear?
Jack, success.
Okay.
Okay, that looks pretty good.
All right. I reset my internet there. Sometimes that helps things a little bit. So
Oh, great, great. It looks good. So,
let's
very
see.
good. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that we were able to get together here.
Yeah. One of the basically this topic came about because last week I don't know if you've ever heard of the Magic Sandwich Show by any chance, but yeah, it's a group of individuals such like DPR Jones, Aaron Ra, and some of these other well-known sort of YouTube atheist. And the topic that they brought up was this idea of accommodate or confront. And basically, as atheists, they were discussing the best way to go about approaching religious people, essentially. And there was a portion of that panel that was very basically their mindset was religious people's beliefs are worthy of ridicule and mockery. I mean, they're so outlandishly ridiculous that the only way to really engage with them is to ridicule and mock them because they're not worth taking seriously. And and I don't know, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, what do you think about that idea?
Well, I mean, I guess, part of it is difficult whether it's being done under a comic frame and under one's freedom of speech and whatever that means. And I think that's very different than trying to say that there isn't something like, politeness, propriety, ways of being civil, of asking a person to be accountable for their beliefs. I think when people do have dogmatic beliefs, and then those dogmatic beliefs lead to practices that have, negative consequences, all kinds of impositions on others, well, then there is a prerogative for people to step in and hold people accountable and to become a little bit more, I guess, for lack of a better word, in people's face about things.
Right.
But I guess there's something more to all of this discussion, though, which is the problem of dogma, the problem of ego attachment, the unwillingness to entertain ultimate mysteries and what those do. Now, this is maybe a way that I would want to bring this together. I don't know if you saw Andromeda's Wake video called Atheist. But I thought that was an interesting video, sort of talking about atheism in terms of a science of, what do you say, the human in its relationship to the cosmos and all this, and also preaching, and literally sort of preaching religious tolerance and understanding of religious views as being fine as long as they don't impose upon others. And I really liked it, but one of the things that came out of it was that, the modern atheistic scientific view, it hasn't resolved any of the questions that were still plaguing even the religious view. So, we say, well, what created the Big Bang and how long was it before the Big Bang was there? Well, these are the same questions as who created God and, what was there before God and how long was God doing whatever he was doing before he created the universe. So I think the sort of skeptical, mystical questions, they're just as prevalent today by the scientific view, within the scientific view as they were before. So I think there's some sense in which there's going to be dogma lurking in those people who are going to be too aggressively saying that they have the answers and other people need to get in line.
And I've heard you say this before in your videos, and I've noticed in the comment section that, I mean, I'm interested to sort of get your feedback on your thoughts. Is it seems as though people push against you and critique you for being too sort of mystical, I guess you could. Maybe I wonder if we stop the video, if our video, if we can just do the Skype call, and if that might make it so it's. Do you know what I'm saying?
I don't know how to do it other than the way I'm doing it right now.
Without the video in there.
Yeah.
Let me see. Okay. But how do you have you got? I mean, have you noticed that sort of as a response that people have been giving you in your videos when you bring up this idea? Look, dogmatism is prevalent among you folks over here too, just as much as it is among the religious, and but the people over here in these sort of I usually call them sort of this anti-theistic community,
Right.
seem to be very reluctant to even acknowledge or entertain the thought that they are being just as dogmatic as the religious are.
Yeah, no, I think that really is the case. Some really bad feedback there. I mean, I think part of the issue is that there's different kinds of dogma. I think one of the main issues, from my perspective, is the lack of historical context regarding how texts were written and the difference between literal and figurative genres of speech. The modern notion of a literal statement is very different than, I guess, the variety of speech genres that preceded it. So when you read, classic religious texts, the Gospels as an example, their statements sound fantastical, but I think they're designed for psychological insight. They're designed to help people, I guess, deal with their own struggles, their own relationships to others, but to dismiss them as useless because they're factually untrue, to me, really misses part of what's going on there.
Do you get pushback from some people when you say, when you make those sorts of assertions? I mean, and by some people, what I'm talking about specifically some atheists, when you're willing to sort of grant this idea, to say that they're useless or ridiculous is not actually, that's not really painting an accurate picture of those.
Oh, I agree. I agree. What is the experience of human gratitude? I mean, how is it possible for me to be grateful for my life per se? The very fact of my life. Now, obviously, there's no one to thank. There's no one to be grateful to. And so you could call that a false belief, and yet the more that someone would try to eradicate that, I would talk about it as an impoverishment of human experience. For me, there's an existential fact of not having a face. And I mean it literally. Look around. You don't have a face. Where your face isn't, the world has been made room for. Your face is a kind of absence, but it's because you exist in relation. You were meant to face the world, to face others, and when you metaphorically reference all of it and you say, even to think about practices of prayer, you could think about practices of prayer as being, toward an ultimate other, but the other is, I think it's a form of self-relation where you're giving a prayer of, again, a gratitude or a prayer of courage or strength, to ask for courage or patience, or to try to relate to oneself through imagining an ideal other, and then to try to grow oneself in terms of those idealized character attributes. That's so different than imagining divine intervention from an actual being who's going to be over there and smite your enemies. Some of that, again, I think is worthy of making fun of. Let's put it on a Saturday Night Live skit. But I'm also going to make fun of those people who are going to deny the resources of shaping themselves in terms of an idealized other.
That's very interesting. So you would say then that would you say that all humans, regardless of whether or not they believe in God, are shaping themselves in some fashion to some sort of idealized other?
I think there's an issue there that we have. I mean, that's just partly where Freud comes in and talks about God as a parental figure. I mean, there is a sense in which the child experiences, parental figures as ultimate moral providers and as caregivers and omniscient and all these things, and then we project that sort of father figure into the sky. I think that's partly right, but I think there's something more complex than that. I think we are an organism that, by its nature, has multi-generationality and has that phenomena. So we can't just reduce it down and go, oh, that's all that it is. We have to then raise the metaphysical question of what is being, such that that is the indigenous route by which beings become themselves through the cultivation of others. And then this starts to problematize ego boundaries. It starts to question who we are really. And I think it starts to raise I think certain questions about how self-relation became possible to begin with. That is, I don't want to say that we're not born with a mind, but there's something like awareness and sentience that comes with the brain, and that there is a unique physiology with the human being per se. But there is something about acquiring a language that comes from sociality, falling into history, and that fall is a kind of fall from innocence into cultural sense-making, I guess just whole ways of relating to the world. And the more that I guess, see myself as coming to relate to myself through relating to others, then this larger question of, how do you get at it? That there is a kind of spirituality or religiosity that doesn't need to make an appeal to anything transcendent or supernatural. It starts to raise questions, though, about how do organisms become themselves through others? What is multi-generationality as a natural phenomena? What is the possibility of learning lessons from a person who's been dead thousands of years? I mean, some of that, it's quite fascinating.
Wow. There's a lot there. Oh, word. But do you... I'm having to sort of step back, and I have to listen to what you say very carefully.
Okay.
Because
I've shot so many videos. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about some of this. I sometimes get frustrated because YouTube is filled with people who, as defense mechanism, want to hear it, and they want it to be one way either or another. Either they think I'm confirming their beliefs or I'm challenging them, and instead of just listening, I think it was. Oh, there are just so many interesting cases of these kinds of, of defense mechanism. I mean, I don't know if you watched that Theory of Everything video, but I think that is partly, there's a cognitive dissonance that comes in because we have a kind of ego attachment, fearing that we could be wrong, but it has to do with the huge ambiguity over these questions. I mean, I think all of us are complicit in having answers to questions that really don't have answers.
Yes, I could certainly understand that. I mean, and there's definitely been plenty of times when I've watched your videos and I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. This is really, sort of encourages this notion of there being a God in some way, and of definitely sort of confirming in some ways like my perspective on things. But then being willing to step back and take the time to, instead of it in other words, I have to contextualize all of it from where you are, from your perspective,
right?
And hear the nuance and I like how you said the ambiguity of it all, and acknowledge there is this sort of ambiguity, which, to be honest, in my experience, people become very frustrated with.
Right.
Oftentimes.
Right.
They don't like.
Right. Well, I think YouTube is so difficult because when you're talking with people, you don't generally just say what you're thinking. You're guessing what other people already know, so you don't want to be obvious, but you try to say something that's interesting, and there's some sense of again, trying to, I guess, meet someone at where they're at. And because YouTube has so many different people, it's very difficult to assess your audience, and you get flanked from multiple directions where I think, if I'm talking generally with a religious person, or particularly a Christian, my number one question to them is, if you discovered that there were no afterlife and Jesus were to show up and say, there's a missing book from the Bible and there won't be any afterlife, that this is the only life, but God loves you and He's given you all that you need, He wants to know, can you forgive Him? That to me is the question that all Christians need to really address. On the other side, if I'm with an atheist, I really want to ask them, questions about to what extent is there spiritual significance in realizing that one is part of the cosmos, not simply a thing in it. That is, there seems to be a real contestation in the scientific community between something like, I am a biological organism that is as individuated, competing with other organisms in Darwinian evolution and survival of the fittest. That's very different than saying I'm stardust and I'm a place and moment of the cosmos. I mean, so some of those really seem to be very different, and it's that larger ambiguity of what is the experience of individuation of a body, but then how is consciousness multi-generational, trans-historical, social, historical, I mean, these kinds of cultural phenomena. I think those are the ones that atheists, from my perspective, are coming up a little skinny on. Or the fact that there are ultimate questions that can't really be answered, and for many people, the unanswerability of them is the spiritual feeling. I'm very confident we will never know, and I could be wrong. I'm happy to say I could be wrong, but I feel pretty confident that we're never going to know why the universe came into existence. It just, in some way, that is a question that now an atheist or a scientist may tell me the question doesn't make sense. And you know what? It does make sense to me. It moves me to a religious impulse, and it gives feelings that open me in love and compassion to suffering of others. So what is all of that?
That's a great question. I mean, and that's why I enjoy watching your videos, because even though there aren't always these answers, I like, I guess, sort of that existential sort of flavor of it.
I don't want to hear that questions that don't have scientific answers are either irrelevant questions or unacceptable questions. To me, that's reductive dogmatism.
Yeah. Now, regarding your first question to Christians, because I am a Christian.
Yeah. What would you say to that?
And it's interesting because I've had people that have asked me, and they've approached the conversation from a perspective in which, to them, their belief in God when they were a Christian was largely a response to a sort of fear that when they die, they're going to go to hell. And in some cases, their response also to Christianity was also out of fear that they would be absent of the presence of their loved ones and these sorts of things. But my response to Christianity it never was about this idea of, I'm going to go to hell if I don't believe in God, but rather it was very much a relational component in which God, to me, specifically as seen through Christ, was someone who related to the suffering in my life that I was going through. And so in that relationship, is not, the foundation of that is not, hey, you're going to go to heaven by believing in me, so much as it was the reality of Christ in this moment, here and now. And there is that additional sort of benefit, I guess you could say, of there being a heaven. So if Jesus came to me and he said, Jack, there is no heaven, I would still say, I'm still going to follow you, because given who you are, the reality of who you are, there is, to me, nothing greater in life to be in communion with than you. And that is ultimately sort of this internal desire that I have and I've found satisfied through Christ.
And you could say to God, I forgive you. It's okay. You did, this world is enough for me, and the injustices are part of my own shaping stone for strength, and it gives my life purpose to do what can be done to minimize the suffering in this world. But I can forgive. Can you forgive the lack of the afterlife? Because I think many people can't. I think that the horrors and injustices are so bad, the social inequality, and because the Bible sanctions private property, now they're kind of caught. Many people are caught, and I think this is particularly true of the right-wing neocon Christian, the sort of rich conservative Christians who are now, they're able to sleep at night because they have accumulated so much wealth that has been sanctioned by the Bible that they need to believe. They literally, Jack, they need to believe that someone else is going to redress this wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that feeling of like, I mean, the question of if God asked me to forgive him, admittedly, I would be perplexed by that because me going to God was never, it was never about, it was about God, can you forgive me? Can you forgive me?
Most Christians don't even get the question. If you ask them, can you forgive God? They'll look at you like you're confused. They'll go, no. You seek forgiveness from God. You don't forgive God. God's all good, all loving. And then I go, look, I didn't ask to be born. There is just unrelented suffering, sorrow, injustice. And it's not just natural disasters and earthquake, all this kind of stuff. It is, there's lots of evil that people do that I think we can feel implicit in. It's funny. I've asked that question to so many people that can you forgive God? Lots of ministers, priests, other people, and I had a Greek priest. The Greek guy said, I said, could many parishioners in your parish, could they forgive God? And he said, I have many in my congregation who they spend a good amount of their prayer time praying that God go light on Satan for having brought all this temptation and stuff into the world. And I thought it was a very odd, interesting. I haven't heard anybody reference Satan in a long time, but I think there was an openness to not only entertain, various kinds of beliefs, but a willingness to have the most grand forms of forgiveness. I think there are other people, I will leave them unnamed, you're going to have to guess who I'm talking about. There are people on YouTube, I can think of one particular individual who he is angry at a God who he claims he doesn't believe in. There are people who are deeply, deeply angry. They feel like they had a bait and switch, they had overdrawn expectations, and now they're holding themselves hostage in an attempt to blackmail this thing that they say they don't believe in. But it has to do with all of these, the unwillingness to forgive the horrors of it. Because life has a lot of horror. It does.
It does. And I think
and I think the Jesus message is in a lot of ways about patience, forgiveness, courage, and compassion in light of the horror of it.
Exactly. I mean, that's to me is sort of the fascinating aspect of Christ is that here we have the God-man who does not come as this warrior, who does not come, certainly not a warrior in the sense of some militaristic campaign that they had envisioned perhaps of the Messiah. He didn't come as trying to overtake the government. Instead, he came as sort of a lowly individual who was actually ministering and reaching out to the broken people around him, the people who didn't have the property, the people who were neglected by and large by their society and were taken advantage of by the religious institution that had been, in some ways, someone could say sort of polluted by the people at the time.
Right.
And this is Christ. And not only does he intervene in that situation, but he goes beyond that to allowing, his very creation to actually subject him to ridicule, mockery, torture, and crucifixion. And only to, in some sense, of course, to defeat it all via the resurrection. And so, when looking at that, there is this sort of sense of, I get it on some level, but then at another level, I don't get it, because to me, it's just so baffling.
Right. I
this
mean,
idea
to
of
me,
being
it's
able
all
to
a metaphor. I mean, the resurrection means the fact that you and I right now are talking about a dead person, and you can use someone who's not here as your shaping stone on the image of who you think you ought to be. And somehow that can be based in feelings of love, which are related to how you think you're related to everything else.
Well, I mean, certainly. I mean, it could be, and I know I have friends that are atheists that they look at Christ, the Christ figure, and in my life as a Christian, and they say, Jack, well, did Jesus really need to? I mean, they'll ask me, did Jesus really need to live? Couldn't your life as a Christian be just as it is, even if he really didn't live? And I always try to caution them that, for me, it's not just about this idea of here's this metaphor. It's about looking at the text that we have and asking some of these challenging questions of, when they are writing these things, are they writing to convey something that is just a metaphor, or is there a sense that they are actually trying to convey a reality that they actually participate
Jack,
in?
I mean, not only do I agree, to me, that's one of the more philosophically interesting questions of, are the monotheistic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are they grounded in an ontological possibility? Would it be possible such that there could have, quotes, been a God, such that that God could have, literally, quotes, become a person? Some of that is, it really tests the human limit of imagination, but I think it's an absolutely fascinating question. But I think what happens is, it does introduce very politically motivated dogma among these three who are now arguing over who wasn't it, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but Corey, that sort of debate, it occurs regardless. I mean, you don't need religion to. I mean, the ideologies and the philosophies and perspectives are always going to be there, regardless of whether or not.
Well, see, I guess I partly agree with that. But okay, so one of my more recent videos, I had someone disagree with a discussion that I had, and the person said, "Look, all you need to know in order to know if a person's an atheist is that they don't believe in any gods. That's it. Atheist means atheist. That's it." And I thought, that's such a disingenuous argument.
It is.
I mean, if some person claims to be a theist, they never just go, "I'm a theist." First they go, "I'm a particular kind of theist." They say, "Well, I'm a Christian," or they say, I'm Jewish, whatever. But then from there, that belief in the deity is related to a host of social practices, beliefs, and largely the deity is used as a sanctioning agent for things. So, for example, I do think that, when people believe in the Christian God sanctions a kind of relationship between humans and the natural world, between man and woman, between human relations in terms of private property. I mean, there are some pretty serious social sanctions that go on through a deity there. So the belief in the deity does have rhetorical political force that's made to as an appeal.
Of course it does. And I agree completely. But that rhetorical force that is a deity for the Christians is, in some sense, I'll say, can easily be, in other words, there's a deity for the atheist. There's a deity for every individual, and I'm using that word deity, of course, loosely, just to convey the idea that there is a force of which, as you were talking about earlier, this idea of consciousness sort of, going beyond just the individual and being multi-generational.
Right.
In other words, there's always something of which people are making an appeal to, and using language as a means, using language to appeal to these factors as sort of ultimate foundational elements to human existence in life. And I mean, it's not just God; it's everything. And to me, it seems like sometimes people look at Christianity, they'll be like, "Well, the problem is this." I'm like, well, yeah, I can understand why people think that's a problem. But the fact is that very same behavior of using language as a means, using language which is grounded in this consciousness that is sort of multi-generational that you talked about, is prevalent among all human species. And as such, is it really fair to just sort of be like, here's the problem with religion? Or would it be more perhaps, balanced to just be like, actually, this is a problem that all of us as humans have in general, and we can never really divorce ourselves from it. And I think it creates an interesting problem, because now we have to figure out, okay, well, how do we address this? How do we address the fact that these people have a sense of what it means to be human and how human existence should be lived out that they believe is fundamentally grounded in these particular notions, whether it's notions of a god or notions of a culture or language or you know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, no, I both do. I mean, I think this is partly why the religious question isn't going to go away. I mean, many people have argued that we are a religious animal, that's part of the way you designate the human being is that you can already see it in primates. They have forms of superstition, forms of significance that seems to be invisible, that's more than practical. The dawning of art is, it's the rudiments are already there. I do think art and religion are more related than people seem to want to admit. The problems there are also, again, that I think some of it's very deep, the way that once you get people to agree that it's a disingenuous argument to just say that someone is an atheist, that as soon as you get them to really get on board and say, okay, you're right, if I'm going to say I'm an atheist, then I have to say that no person claims to be a theist. The theist has the use of the theism for a whole set of beliefs. The second that the atheist starts to give the counter narrative, and they start to give the origin story and the story of ultimate ends, well, then at that point, atheism is a religion. At least it's an atheistic religion. It becomes a set of socially instituted belief systems that they transcend any given individual. It probably has something like a sacred text. At this point, it's going to be Darwin. It's going to be a couple other texts. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and I think we certainly see this happening on YouTube. I mean, they're certainly, I would say, some of the most popular, and I call them anti-theist, because by and large, it seems to me the most prevalent expression of atheism is this anti-theistic notion that is actually this, as you put it, I like how you put this, an atheistic religion, because it actually has taken, it's taken these, there's no,
but I mean, Jack, who cares though? But I mean, if it's an atheistic religion that practices love and compassion and wants to help people and challenge individual ego and give psychological resources for people, who cares what people call it? Or no?
Sure. I think it doesn't matter what you call it, but I think the part of caring gets brought in there, as the part of caring gets brought in with Christians, is, look, the moment that you begin to step outside of sort of the confines of your framework, and you begin to sort of impose it upon others outside of it, well, then now we care, because now this atheistic framework is becoming one in which you're trying to establish sort of these power words such as rationality, logic, and reason and truth in such a way as though it's almost exclusive to you. Right. And so I'm going to call sort of BS and say I don't think there's much consistency here. Right. I mean, it's you're saying I'm being irrational and delusional for believing that Jesus really lived, was crucified, and rose again, and these sorts of things, but you are willing to believe in these fabricated sort of notions of rationality, truth, logic, and reason in these strict sort of dogmatic ways. And I would call inconsistency. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, some of that I don't know. I mean, I guess I think I guess part of the problem is that there are going to be a good number of scientifically informed atheists who, with good cause, are going to point out that that they have as much reason to air self-righteousness as some Christians do. See, because I think part of the reason many people are appealed to a religion is we're fearful little animals, and to stave off cognitive dissonance and our various forms of anxiety, we try to get with those groups. Again, I was talking about it as an authoritative disambiguation, but it's it's a rally towards self-righteousness that staves off the terror of the ambiguity of it all. But what I think happens is, religions go, look, we have the higher moral ground, and we're going to tell you how you treat people and how you do things. And then come along some vegetarians, who are pro-green, and they go, these Christians are troublemakers, and then the war begins. See, there's some sort of self-righteousness there when people don't want to admit that their own belief systems do have detrimental impacts, right? I mean, I think there are some legitimate concerns that various atheist scientific groups have. Hey, hold on here. I got somebody else calling me here.
No problem.
So can we wrap? Okay, I'm going to put you on pause here.
Okay.
Oh, well, I guess they just hung up. I guess I'll try them back in a little bit. So, I don't know. I'm not sure how well this record. I mean, could we maybe wrap it up, or could we try again some other time, or talk more about this as an ongoing discussion?
Yeah, of course. I would love that. I think I definitely, I know from my end, I'm learning a lot, and as I listen to you, trying to sort of acquire more of a grasp of your language set. So it's good
Jack,
for me.
I just, I myself do not describe myself as an atheist. To me, myself, my own position as atheism doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't, though, believe in a transcendent being. I don't believe in a life after death. I don't believe in a divine intervention. I do. To me, the religious questions are: could life have not been? And the second, could consciousness have not emerged? Those are pretty religiously significant. And I find it ironic that there's a lot of people who are scientists who believe in a fully deterministic universe who then want to claim that life and consciousness were both flukes. I want to go, well, make up your mind. What does fluke mean if it's fully deterministic? I mean, some of it all is, it gets really problematic how some of this stuff comes down. So I don't think that one needs to make an appeal to dogma. I think what people really need to do is sort of step back and watch their own mind very carefully and try to watch their feelings as they come into play when people say things to them, and see if they can sort of assess, again, the ego attachment as it comes with beliefs, and then try to get at what is that, why does that occur? Because I think a lot of the greed and the other problems they're scared little animals who have mistaken themselves for the little sacks of skin rather than the whole big picture that they are.
Yeah. There's definitely, I would love to keep talking with you, and it'd be great to have ongoing conversations whenever you have time.
Yeah,
I certainly
that would be
enjoy
great.
that.
I really prefer the dialogue format on YouTube, so.
Perfect.